an answer where God was telling them what to do with all that time. You would think it would be a time of getting closer to God and everything else, but nothing about that.
No. Probably they have lots of livestock, sheep, and then maybe they eat meat.
They do have to take care of them. And you notice it said your animals are going to be taken care of too. You can't pick grain for your animals. You can't go out and harvest things for your animals. Same thing. But a lot of animals, you let them out in a field and they're fine.
But this is what the Lord is telling Moses for them to do. And so he's going to tell them what to do during that year.
So it's wise management of the land. But Matthew Poole, a theologian, gave another reason. He said that one of the reasons was that in Sabbath years, everybody in Israel is in the same place. They're all poor, living off the land, trusting God for their provisions. And that would give them compassion. Don't know if they ever really, really observed this. We don't find any reference of them doing that. So, don't know. So, Jewish tradition says that when they come into the Promised Land, it's going to take 7 years for their first conquest and another 7 years to actually divide the land. So tithes were paid for the first time 14 years after they entered Canaan, and the first sabbatical year happened 7 years later than that. So they're saying the first sabbatical year would have been the 21st year they were there. But again, we don't find in Scripture that they ever really observed it. But Orthodox Jews celebrate it now, but they find their way around it. For some, they will sell their land to a Gentile the day before the Sabbath year. They'll work it, and then they'll buy it back from the Gentile when the Sabbath year is over.
They must be really good friends with that Gentile.
The Gentile makes a little money, and the Jewish person could say, but it wasn't my land, so it was all right if I worked it.
So you mean
You kind of paid someone else for you to keep your land. You just they got extra money for doing nothing.
Kind of renting.
Yeah. And then others are using the rotating the crop thing. They'll let one piece of land lie fallow, and they'll just a continual Sabbath year. And neither one of those, again, is what God intended. A way around. So now we're going to get into a different kind of Sabbath, verses 8 through 12.
Count off 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 times 7 years, so that 7 Sabbaths of years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. Sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each one of you is to return to his family property, and each to his own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee and is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields.
Okay, so the year of Jubilee. It's another Sabbath rest thing, but a lot of extra things happening. It's like a double Sabbath year, because what happened in year 49?
That's a rest. They must have to rest for 2 years.
Yeah, so Sabbath year was, the regular Sabbath year was year 49, because it was a multiple of 7. Year 50 you get the year of Jubilee, and you're not planting crops again. So 2 years in a row of that. Now, most Hebrews would have only lived through one in their lifetime, 1 year of Jubilee. It's a really severe test of faith. So the Jubilee was proclaimed on the 10th day of the 7th month. The Day of Atonement started on the 10th day of the 7th month. So the year of Jubilee started on the Day of Atonement. They usually figure it started on the evening. Again, this is another one we don't know if we don't have any record of them actually observing it. In fact, Scripture kind of points out that they didn't. Second Chronicles 36:21 warns the Hebrews that if you don't observe this, you're going to suffer. And they did. They spent 70 years in captivity with the Babylonians, and some of the prophets were saying it's because you didn't observe the Jubilee year. And that it was based on how many times you didn't observe the Jubilee year from the time of King Solomon. So from the time of King Solomon to when they went into captivity, it was 490 years, which they figure they should have done 70 of these Jubilee years, and they didn't. So 70 times 7, it was 490 years. They were punished because they didn't do this. So records show they probably didn't ever do this. But Moses is following God's command and telling them, you need to do this. This announcement of the Jubilee signaled that all Hebrew slaves were set free. Slave laws in Exodus and Deuteronomy gave an option for a slave to agree to stay with his master after 6 years of enslavement. But in the year of Jubilee, it didn't matter. Everybody was set free, whether they wanted to or not. Let me see if I have another picture to show you. Our founding fathers knew of this principle. This is the Liberty Bell. Mm-hmm. And this is the verse about it, proclaiming liberty throughout all the land to its inhabitants. So it's quoting verse 10 on our Liberty Bell. Okay, so if you sold land in the year of Jubilee, it came back to you. Now, the Hebrews would only sell land if they were like in really bad financial straits. They would not sell it just because they wanted a little extra money. It was a really serious thing to sell the land. And all these laws apply only to Hebrews. Verses 13 through 16.
In this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his property. And if you make a sale to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. You shall pay your neighbor according to the number of years after the Jubilee, and he shall sell to you according to the number of years for crops. If the years are many, you shall increase the price, and if the years are few, you shall reduce the price, for it is the number of crops that he is selling to you. You shall not wrong one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. Okay, so once they get to the promised land, they're going to split the land between the tribes.
And within those tribes, they're going to split it between the families of the tribes. Those initial assignments will be the permanent assignments throughout their time in Israel. Land in Israel would never be permanently sold, only leased. And the amount of the lease depended on how close you were to the year of Jubilee. Because at the year of Jubilee, it's going back to the original owner. God wanted this land to belong to whatever tribe it was assigned to. It meant that no family was going to be landless forever. Every 50 years, they had a chance to start over again. It's going to be the same for us, but we don't have a 50-year wait. We're citizens of heaven, and a day's going to come when we hear that trumpet blast. Now we're going to go back. We're going to come to our true home for eternity. So this year of Jubilee, debts were forgiven, slaves freed. The levels between the wealthy and the poor would be evened out. And it seems that after the Jews returned from exile, they tried to observe this, but before that, it doesn't sound like they did. You can imagine what kind of how the wealthy would feel about this coming and how the poor would feel. So we'll end with this set. Verses 18 through 21 says, "Therefore you shall do my statutes and keep my rules and perform them, and then you will dwell in the land securely. The land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and dwell in it securely. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year? If we may not sow or gather in our crop, I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, so that it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating some of the old crop. You shall eat the old until the 9th year when the crop arrives." So God says, if you will just be obedient, I'm going to provide twice as much in the 6th year. Not only to cover the Sabbath year, but 3 years later. It's kind of a super promise from God. He says, I command my blessing. All he has to do is speak, but he is commanding it. That's a for sure thing. And there is. I'm gonna go ahead and do verse 23 because it's one more verse. "The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me." So this is what it's all about. It all belongs to God. The whole earth is his, but he has a special regard for the land of Israel. That's his chosen land. God could have chosen any place on the globe, but he chose Israel. And because the land belonged to God, it couldn't be sold. It was his. It says you're going to be a sojourner and stranger forever, and that doesn't sound like a blessing, but it means we belong to God and not the world. And that's true for us today. We belong to God, not the world. So that is where we're going to end today. We'll pick up in verse 24 and 25 next week. And yeah, I'm going to shut this off now. So